Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. It's the half mark for October, so this would be a perfect time to do a roundup of my September reads. Thankfully it's not the end of the month yet. The reason why it took me so long is because although I started recording the books I read in order at the beginning of September, it kind of went to hell as the month passed, so it took a little while to compile everything, make sure everything that I've listed here was finished in September, because that is how I track books. I don't track when I start them, I track when I finish them. So the books I started in late August will be finished in early September, and that's when I consider them, as done of my TBR, and I can move on. To record my progress, I used this lovely sketchbook, which I hope you will see, and this is what my reading list looks like in my very messy handwriting. But anyway, yeah, this is what we've got working for us. And before we begin, one little thing I want to mention is that I don't use star ratings for my books unless I have to. And I do not like using star ratings because I feel people get stuck on the rating you give the book and are not paying as much attention to what you're saying in the review. So usually I mention if I loved the book, if it was enjoyable, if it didn't really do it for me, and unless it's really crappy, which in most cases I won't even mention the book, I will just skip over it. I always find interesting things in books. It's rare that I completely despise something I've read with all my heart. It's really rare, and I kind of tend to rant about it, mostly to my friends. But yeah, that's how I do it. I just say which books I enjoyed, which I didn't as much, what I loved about some books, what I found interesting in others, and if you want star ratings, you can always go to Amazon and Goodreads and check them out. I try to avoid them as much as I can. Of course, when I review on Amazon, because I know that helps authors a lot, I have to give a star rating, but I don't really talk about it, not here on my YouTube channel and not on my review and book blog, which is Eyes on Books. It's just a personal preference. Another thing that's important is that I'm usually very bad with character names. Unless it's a character that's been with me through a series and the name is really stuck in my head, I tend to forget their names. I don't really forget book details though. So it's one of the reasons I rarely reread the book, is because I already know all the details, and it's annoying because I know everything that happens. I like to be surprised by books. So without any further ado, let's get started. I've read 12 books in the month of September, and the total page count is 3,495 pages, which I don't think is too shabby. I've had worse months, I've had better months, but September overall was one of my best reading months this year. So let's get started. The first book I finished, by the way, I tried to keep these in order of finishing them. I failed with some, I'm sorry about that. I'll do better in October, which is already started over here. So I'm planning on keeping up with that and maybe having a better record, especially with Spookathon happening. So I'm sorry, it's not in exact order. The first book, and I know this one was the first one because this is, for the first two I was really methodical about it, was The Master WillAppear by L.A. Witt. I've read quite a few L.A. Witt books, some have also been mentioned on this channel, and The Master WillAppear is a very interesting BDSM contemporary gay romance novel in that it happens in the fencing world. It's a May-December type of pairing, meaning the two main characters are a college professor and a student. The professor is not teaching anything for the student in question. They meet in a gym while they're practicing their fencing. The young man is extremely cocky and he's using strength rather than skill, and the college professor becomes his teacher. It's a very interesting story. I didn't know that much about fencing, and the last book I read that involved some fencing was The Three Musketeers. So it's been a while, it was lovely to get back into it, and this was an enjoyable read for me. The second book I read was Zenith by, I hope I don't mess this name up, Arshad Ahsanuddin. I hope I didn't completely butcher that. If I did, sorry Arshad, I really did try my best. Zenith is a combination of sci-fi and time travel. It's space exploration which tries to figure out interstellar flight through wormhole manipulation, and the technology that was supposed to create the wormhole also connects points in time. There are several factions that want to impact humanity's future, and it's an intriguing read. It's part adventure, part gay romance, but I think the romance part is quite muted and toned down, and the characters are really interesting and well developed, and the concept for the ship they're on, their potential futures, everything that's happening, that's quite interesting, and I've really enjoyed getting into this story. It's a first in a series, and I'll definitely check out the rest of the books. The third book, I won't talk too much about it because I've already mentioned it in my September favorites, was the book I enjoyed the most this month, and that's Gazes Into You by Alex Jane. I really like the investigator character, and there was another mystery that came to a close second, but this one, I don't know, there was just something about it, the setting, the character's backstory, and the fact that he was kind of stalkerish that just appealed to me. I hadn't seen that, at least not that I remember in recent days, so it was a great read. The fourth book I'm mentioning, although I'm pretty sure I read this toward the end of the month, but anyway, is Thunder Moon by Joanne Mallory. You have heard me mention Joanne here on my channel because she's a fellow author and YouTuber, and she's an all-around great person. And I'm always a bit skeptical when I go into reading books by authors I really adore as a person, because I'm afraid I won't like it. And I had the same problem with a lot of my friends, and I always end up liking the books. I was especially worried with Joanne's book because it's a paranormal, magic-based, contemporary feel romance. It's a male-female romance, and I've been staying very far from them lately because I usually don't connect with the characters as well. This was an interesting take on healing and magic and how they would work in the real world. The story is set in the UK, which I really enjoyed, and although it felt like a bit too fast in terms of romance and how fast the relationship between the two main characters developed, the book managed to tone down the Insta relationship feel because it was fast, but during the few weeks these characters had together, they spent entire days getting to know each other. It wasn't like, oh, I met you 3 weeks ago, we had 2 dates and now we're in love. I still don't know exactly how to deal with I love you after 2 or 3 weeks. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this book it worked. I think it was pulled off nicely, and I can't share anything more about the story because I'm afraid I'm going to spoil it for you, but you should definitely check Joanne's book. I bought this a while back, and I also pre-ordered the sequel, and I can't wait to get that. It should be released super soon. I will have to check the dates for you. The fifth book was Like People by R.A. Padmos. This is a historical romance. It happens at the end of World War II. It features a soldier in the German army. He's never been a Nazi per se or part of the SS, but he has been fighting for Germany. Not that he had a choice in this, because refusing to go to war wasn't something the Germans would have taken lightly. Anyway, he manages to survive fighting on the Russian front, and he ends up in a prisoner camp in the UK where he meets one of the investigators there who was Jewish, actually. And his job was pretty much to listen to people, tell their stories, and some of them would start by stating they weren't in the SS, they weren't really Nazis, but you know, killing Jews kind of made sense in the long run. We didn't get too much into it, it's a relatively short read and I think there was a lot of telling instead of showing, but it was definitely interesting. And the pairing of this German soldier, I think he was an officer of sorts, and a Jewish person was quite interesting. The sixth book I read is another one by a friend. It's Honey and Heat by Rian Durant. Rian did send me an arc of this book, but I bought it for myself because I like to support my friends and I usually buy their books even if I get them for free. I do that with a lot of that send me arcs to review, mostly for my blog, but I usually buy the book as well because if I enjoyed it, why not support them? Honey and Heat is pretty angsty contemporary romance. It's set in the city of Varna in Bulgaria. It was a very enjoyable read, but the problem I had with this book, it was a minor problem, but somehow it pulled me out of the story. It was the names Rian used. I don't know why, but none of them sounded Bulgarian to me. I've traveled to Bulgaria many times. I've been to Varna twice. And I just needed a bit more of a local feel, I guess, in the names. But that's just a personal preference. Other than that, the story flowed really well. The angst was just the right amount, not to get on your nerves, but to make your heart beat faster and wonder what the characters would do and maybe even shed a few tears. If you're me, shed a lot more tears because I cry a lot when I read books and watch movies, and yeah, let's glaze over that. Let's pretend like I'm not a crybaby. The seventh book I read is Daimonion by J.P. Jackson. This is a first in a series. The series is called Apocalypse, if I'm not mistaken. And the setting is quite interesting. Think about the first seasons of Supernatural when hell is trying to start the apocalypse, but instead of humans fighting against it, think of demons and people who were bound to hell in some way, who turn against their master and try to stop this from happening. They stop to prevent Lucifer from breaking free and taking over Earth. It's a very interesting take on witchcraft and demons and types of demons and how higher-ups in hell would use them, and how godlike creatures are not necessarily good and they can be quite devious. There are Greek influences in how the gods are created, and I like the take on witchcraft that it consumes souls. It was a very interesting theory, and I think it's one that's pretty solid if you try to make all witches seem evil and bound to hell. I enjoyed the read. I found it very interesting, but the point of view was kind of all over the place. It kind of jumped between a lot of characters because otherwise you couldn't get all the information. I don't know how I would have seen it done, but some of these characters I didn't care for enough to listen to things from their point of view. I'm not sure how the author could have revealed things better, but it was just too much jumping from one character to another for me, so that was a bit of a problem. The next book is You Are Not Me by Leta Blake. This 8th book of mine is a coming-of-age contemporary romance. Well, contemporary, it happens in the 90s, so yeah, I'd say it's sort of contemporary. It features a young man who is about to go to college. He's been having a relationship with his best friend who is not out of the closet and is actually dating a girl on the side. He claims to love both of them, and the character, Peter, is just very torn between loving his boyfriend and wanting to not share him and to not be a secret that he hides from most of the world. At the same time, he feels this attraction to another young man who's out as he is. He's in college and he seems to have things sorted out for himself, yet Peter doesn't want to let go of the possibility things would be different when college promises so much. At the point we are in the story, Adam, his boyfriend, is in Italy with his family, so they are apart, which is not that bad because I think Peter really needed that break from his boyfriend to figure himself out and get to accept who he is, meet more people who are like him, who think like him, or who have completely different experiences than him, yet they share this part about being gay in a not particularly friendly society. It was a very touching read. I cried a lot, I enjoyed it, and I definitely recommend it to you. I should say this is the second in a series, and I want to read the first book, but I didn't need to read it to understand this book. It just worked very well on its own, and I think that's important to say. The 9th book I read is Spun by J.L. Merrow. This is a sort of romantic comedy contemporary romance, which I've enjoyed tremendously. It features a young gay man who's accustomed to the London gay life, but because he hooks up with someone at a party who turns out to be married to a woman and quite close to his boss, he loses his job, he loses his apartment, and he has to move somewhere in the countryside. He gets a job from his former boss, who's starting his own company, and he moves in with this small town postman who's after a pretty bad divorce. The divorce itself wasn't that bad, but he can only see his kids every so often. His wife left him for someone else, so he's figuring things out. They are as different as they can be, and somehow they fall in love. I loved this perspective of a man in his 40s discovering, I think he's in his 40s, I know he's just quite a bit older than the other main character. I've not paid much attention to the age, to my shame, but he never questioned his sexuality until that point. So he lived for most of his life thinking he was straight, and now he has to deal with this attraction to a gay man. I think it was really nicely done. It wasn't extremely angsty, it was a fun read, and at the same time, despite the comedic touches, it stayed realistic and relatable, and it didn't glaze over serious matters. The next book I read was Red Fish, Dead Fish by Amy Lane. This was the second mystery thriller book that I read last month, and this was the one that I said came to a close second. It had a pretty common trope in detective stories, and what I mean by that is that both the investigator and the serial killer he was trying to catch had a very, very similar background. They both had pretty tragic backstories, and they'd gone through similar yet different circumstances later in life. One of them became a cop, although he's pretty damaged himself, especially when it comes to love and relationships. And the other one went into the army and got out of there a serial killer. It was a very enjoyable read. I loved the investigation. I loved the chase to catch the serial killer. I was pretty caught up in the psychological aspects of the book and the relationship between the investigator and his partner, who was a lawyer at the same law firm where the investigator worked. It took readers into the world of people we tend to overlook because they're homeless, they live on the streets, and they were described as dirty pretty, and it was at some point mentioned in the book that you almost couldn't see the pretty under the dirty for some characters. The investigator and the serial killer were very attractive men, but they come from really dodgy circumstances. I really loved it. I completely recommend you read it. This is again a second in a series, and it worked well as a standalone. You didn't need to read the first book, although from what I could catch from this book, it's a really interesting read and I want to try it out. The next book is Summer Lessons by Amy Lane. This was another romantic comedy, a contemporary tale of a man who's always been thrown into dubious relationship and weird circumstances because of what comes out of his mouth. He's always saying outrageous things. And he falls for this young man who asks him out. He totally believes at first it's a joke, but this young man has his own issues. He's still living with his mother, who's been controlling his entire life. While they do work really well together, the young man needs to get out of the house and sort out his life on his own, which is not always easy when you're in a budding relationship. I've really enjoyed the read. Again, I've loved the comedic parts of it, yet it was a very angsty read and I cried a lot because I always cry when things go bad and people are sad, because I'm a crybaby. The last book I have for you is one that my friend Nikki recommended. I know she loved this series quite a bit. Let me just check the name of the series. Yes. The Saint-Germain series, it features a vampire by the same name, and I read the first book in the series. It's Hotel Transylvania, and the author is Quinn Yarbro. I am not so sure about this series. It was an interesting setting. It was happening in Paris in the period of Louis XV, and I don't know, it just... some parts worked for me really well, others didn't. I didn't particularly enjoy the style of writing. I love the setting, I love the story, I love the characters. I just couldn't get into this as much as I would have expected from a vampire story, I think, because I'm used to just devour them and love them anyway. I'm not sure if I'll continue reading in the series. I'm going to try one more of the series, but a more recent release from this author, and see if I click better with Saint-Germain, and if I do, I'm going to read the entire series. Right now it was a good read, but not great, if that makes sense. So that's it from me. Like I said, it was 12 books. I will make sure to leave the titles, authors and Amazon links down below so you can find them easily, and I shall see you tomorrow with a new video. Enjoy what's left of your weekend, because this is supposed to go out on Sunday. And like if you've enjoyed this video, do let me know if you want me to keep this up and do a video like this every month. And subscribe, comment, all that jazz. You know what to do. Bye!